Coming to you from Michigan, USA, and listened to by people all over the planet. Get ready to be safe and sound with Sean Sparkman.
Never take your eyes off your opponent, even when you bow.
Welcome to the Safe and Sound podcast with your host, Sean Sparkman. I have the pleasure today of sitting down with Todd Hohauser. Todd, I'm so excited to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and your company and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely, Sean. Thanks for coming today. We are a strategic, cultural, retained executive search firm. Was started in 1986 by my father, Dr. Harvey Hohauser. And he was talking about culture and fit before that was cool. So he has a PhD in sociology. And what we do is we mostly work with family or privately held businesses that need senior executive talent. So CEOs, VPs, directors, depending on the size of the company, and helping to integrate them into existing cultures, which can be very tricky, and you really have to pay attention. So
I can imagine.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun.
Yeah, so you're a family-started and owned business to this day, because it's not just you, and your dad's retired at this point, right?
That is correct. He retired in 2015.
So it's you and your brother, and essentially you're working together as a family business to help family businesses. Can you describe a little bit of what that's like and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it took some work, and took some work for Eric and I to kind of get together and get aligned on the same page. We also received a degree from the Ivy School of Business in Toronto, Canada, as Family Enterprise Advisors, which is a great program. 1,000 hours of class time.
1,000 hours?
Literally.
Oh, wow.
I counted it. Yeah, I don't like to count either. But there were written exams and oral exams. It was very rigorous. And so that taught us a lot of tools for us to use in our business, but it also taught us a lot of tools to take to our clients, like the Baker three-circle model, which Professor Baker was a Harvard professor way back in the 80s who came up with this three-circle model, which your listeners can just Google. It's a fantastic model for family businesses. And that's just one of the many tools that we use to help our clients after we helped ourselves.
And I'm in a family business myself, and it's always an interesting dynamic, right? And coming from the fact that your dad started it, and you, of course, worked, with or for your dad for a long time, can you just describe a little bit of what that was like when it comes to the family business?
Absolutely. Well, I've got to give Harvey a lot of credit because he was a very smart man. And he said to me almost immediately, I'm the problem. We got to figure out how I can get out of your way because you're always going to be my son. You're great. You're doing great stuff here. But I've got to figure out how to move out of the way so that you can evolve the business. A lot of companies, a lot of research talks about how companies survive from generation to generation. And the numbers are basically 33% go from first generation to second generation, 11% go from second to third generation, and only 3% go from second to third generation. So there's you have to be really mindful. Now, some of that stuff has to do with family businesses being sold to other businesses. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, a lot of that is because they don't continue because of Chapter 11 or what have you. So, as I said, my father had a lot of foresight and understanding of what he needed to do to get out of the way, and we worked a lot on that. So that was 1999 when I joined the business, and in that very first year, I had no idea what I was doing. And so to hear my father say, you're going to take over and I got to get out of your way, I was like, please don't go anywhere yet.
Right.
I need to learn some things. And then it was 2008. I went on the most important search that I ever did, and that was to recruit my younger brother to join the business. And so he joined in 2008, and we found this program actually 8 years later in 2016, this Ivy School of Business program in Toronto. And to be honest, we didn't really know what we were going to do with it. There was another recruiter I met in Vancouver who had been through the program, And she said, well, if you're working with all these family businesses, you have to do this. And I looked at the program, and my brother and I said, yep, we have to do this. And it was really tiring, to be honest.
I
because
can imagine, because you weren't just going through the program, you're still running your business at the same time, right?
Yes, and we're sitting there learning, and we're taking that learning and applying it to us at the same time thinking about how to apply it to our clients. So it really got our brains active, right? We really dug into it.
Well, it's not just
successful.
you and your brother at the company. So I imagine it wasn't just how do you apply it to yourself and to your clients, but also how to bring it back and apply it to your team.
Exactly. So you had asked a question that I didn't fully answer, which was how does it work, right? And, we'll have to do 3 podcasts on that because it's a pretty huge subject. But I'll try to boil it down because that's where that 3-circle model comes in. And so if you could imagine 3 concentric rings overlapping, you have to understand where does the family start and where does business begin. So the 3 circles are a family circle, a business circle, and an ownership circle. And you can plot the different players in those 3 circles and how they overlap. So there's 11 different locations where those 3 circles overlap. So Eric and I had to be very mindful of, okay, we need to have an ownership discussion. So we set a monthly ownership meeting, and we just speak ownership things in that meeting. Eric reports to me, although he's a co-owner of the business. So we have a separate meeting wherein I'm providing him feedback and guidance on his role, right?
So you have clear divisions.
Exactly. And so we have to we have to be very careful with the team because there's 11 of us. And my son works for us part-time, but he's not in the office. He works remote. But we have to be careful with the team to not let any of those familial entanglements kind of migrate into business conversations. So there was a time where Eric and I would go into closed door meetings and the rest of the team were like, well, mommy and daddy are fighting this, and they confessed to me years later. They were like looking at each other like, are we going to have a job next week? Are we going to have somewhere to work? And that's been years since that's happened because we had to get that stuff settled out, make sure we were aligned on the values and the vision of the business, and make sure that we're not unnecessarily or codependently entangling the employees. We want to be interdependent, not codependent.
Well, and I'm sure the division of your relationship also made a big difference, having an ownership and a actual in the business conversation. And then, of course, you also have your we're brothers, familial, outside the business completely conversation too, right?
Yeah. And there's other factors where we're just very lucky. So my brother Eric is 8 years younger than me. So if there's 5 or more years between siblings, you're actually less competitive because there's more of that gap, right?
Makes sense.
It's also very clear what his skills are and what my skills are, what he handles in the business and what I handle in the business. And we worked with a consultant, not only to establish our values, but to establish our roles and responsibilities. So we figure it's like that old story about the cobbler's children go shoeless. You ever heard that expression?
I have not. No.
No, it's fascinating.
Yeah, let's hear the story.
So it's kind of like whatever you specialize in, you can't do for yourself.
Okay.
So the cobbler, the guy who makes the shoes back in the good old days, or the Hansel and Gretel stories, his children would be the ones without shoes, but everybody else in the village would have great shoes, right? So I might poke fun at you and say, none of your family members have life insurance because you sell life insurance. But needless to say, we look at our roles and responsibilities. What we do for a living is recruit leaders, and we help our clients write job descriptions. So when we had to write a job description, it was actually quite funny because our consultant asked me to do it, gave me a form to kind of fill it out, and I looked at him and I said, oh, John, I can do this in 5 minutes. I do this for a living. It took me 3 months. It was really tough because we had to have very clear delineations between what Eric does and what I do. Sure. And it's been Very helpful. We constantly pull them out and let's review this again. Is this within my scope or am I outside of my scope? And so those boundaries are very helpful.
Well, and I'm sure that ties into something that you mentioned that I really want to dive a little deeper into, and that was core values. And that's something that I know is very near and dear to your heart. And I want to hear more about why it's near to your heart and why it's important for not just you, but for what you're doing and for other people, and not just their companies, because I know it goes throughout all of your life, right? It's not a, oh yeah, this is just our company's values, but they're core values, meaning there's something that is deep inside of you that says, hey, this is why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on a day-to-day basis. So if you could just expand a little bit, I'd love to hear.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why, but this image flashed in my head when you asked the question. My son, he was born in 1993, and we always would buy him these crazy hats. And we just loved crazy hats, and people would always ooh and ah about him when we're out in public and strap him to our chest, you know, those little baby carriers.
Right.
And we put a button on his hat that said, hate is not a family value. Because during that time in 1993, there was a lot of discussion in the media about that, and it caused me to think and reflect a lot about my own personal values, and whether you know or not, you have those values inside of you. So I'll answer. There's a lot of facets to the question you asked, because we're dealing with ourselves and our own values, but also the candidate's values and the client's values. And they're not as black and white as you would think. There's a lot of gray area. So you have to have a process to manage that integration. So as far as our values are concerned, you know, we didn't just randomly go into a dictionary and start going through and looking up words, right?
Yeah.
We had a consultant, again, who worked with us to pull those values out of us. As a matter of fact, his name is John Quinlan. He's written 2 books. One's called Alignment Strong. Alignment Strong by John Quinlan for your listeners. And it's a great book to look at how to align your culture.
Selfishly, it's not just for my listeners.
Okay.
I have not heard of that book, so I'm going to have to pick that up myself. And what part of this question is selfish in a way, because I love to learn and I want to really be able to delineate my core values in a better way than I already have, because I know them in my head and I know how to explain to them when, like, you and I are having a one-on-one conversation, and it's easy to see what I believe in and why. But I love what you've done on your website and what you've done as far as, like, delineating them and making them written down so that it's very easy to understand and you can really live it out every day. And I'm just going to give a little hint as to part of Todd's values here. It's elf hair.
Right.
And he even has it on his license plate. And I know he's going to go into a little more as to why and what it means. But
Absolutely. And I'll quickly just say that that stands for empowerment, learning, family, helping, adaptation, independence, and respect. We happen to also be big Lord of the Rings geeks, which is why we just loved it, that it happened. It literally just happened to spell out elf hair, which is what clicked for us. We just said, oh, this has to be it because it's who we are. But the process that we went through is not a process that everybody should go through. We went through a certain process, and it can be different for different people. So for us, it was life charting. It was talking with John about our journey in our life and our high points and our low points and what we learned. And excuse me, he was very masterful to pull out those key areas, those milestones in our life to say, hey, look, maybe look here. He would shine a light on it. Maybe look here, because this is a theme between you and your brother. And so we came up with those 7 words, which it's a lot. 7's a lot. You know, really 3 to 5 is better. But I'll explain a little bit more why it's 7. But we took those words and we defined them all. So it's very easy to go to the dictionary and define empowerment. What became challenging was, what does empowerment mean at Harvey Hohauser and Associates? Because empowerment here may mean something else somewhere else.
what's the application of the word as opposed to the definition?
Exactly. And what's the behavioral application? So we were very clear to write down, if you work here, this is what empowerment looks like. Here is an example. And we did that with all 7 of the words. And so when we rolled it out with the staff, they were just like, yeah, you're right. This is what you guys have been doing. This is what we do.
We can get behind this, and we can internalize it and make it part of what we do every day.
Exactly. So it was kind of funny, just to give a little silly family story. We had these words, and they were not in that order. And we literally went to a Scrabble website
And just let it
and
rearrange
put the
them.
letters in there. And it's funny because my father, who is brilliant, is not really good at meetings. He would always get bored, and he would take a word and write a word on a piece of paper, and he would scramble it instead of participating in the meeting. Mm-hmm. He would take a word and just break it down and write it in different ways. And so when we put this into this website, it was almost like an homage to our father, because this is what he would do naturally. And the words elf and hare floated to the top, and Eric and I, like I said, are Lord of the Rings geeks, and we're like, oh, that's it. We're there. This is cool. Yeah. And we even have our, you know the picture, and you can go to Hohauser.com and kind of see the picture, which is kind of a representation of our values and representation of elf hair.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool picture. And there'll be a link in the show notes that'll take you right to the Harvey Hohauser website, so you can check that out. But I want to hear a little bit more about the values and how they apply to when you're working with a company, a family business, to help them find an executive. How do your values apply in that situation?
Well, it's at every step. So the picture will be there. Amy Ferguson was the artist that I consigned to do it. And on the picture, the border is very fine, intricately woven elf hair, like a Celtic knot. And that really is our process. So those 7 values are in everything that we do for our clients. That's our mandate. That's our focus. But we have to be very careful, because the search and the match is not about our values. It's about theirs. So we can use our values to manage the process. We can show those values when we're getting to know clients to say, this is who we are. Does it match who you are? But then we have to put them aside. Of course, you never really put values aside. They're inside of us. But we have to look at their values, because we want to match somebody to their values, not ours. So we take a deep dive into every client's values. That's part of our initial meeting. When we talk about, okay, you need a CFO? All right, well, what's the culture here? What are your guiding principles? What are your values? And I'm really happy when somebody can just rattle that off really quick when I'm talking to them. When they say to me, oh, they're on our website, or you know what, I'll get back to you and get those to you. That's not a good indication that your culture is strong. Because when the culture is strong, the leader, the owner of the company, those values are in their blood. So the question we ask candidates and our clients is this one. Your parents each taught you a value that you hold near and dear to your heart, a value that you think about every single day, a value that's immovable and unchangeable, and each of your parents taught you a different value. What was the value that your father taught you, and what was the value that your mother taught you? And when you harvest that information from the candidates, then you can look at that with the value of your client to see if there's alignment. When we present candidates, we do this in something called a matrix presentation, but it's a short list presentation of the candidates. We will tell the client, this is what they told us when they answered that question, right? And so that will give the client some insight. You know, we also talk about achievements and, you know, GPA and direct reports and, you know, even some adjectives that the direct reports would describe them and all sorts of information. But that values information is very important at that meeting because it's a really quick indicator if there's alignment or not. That's just one of the many ways we use it.
I really like that. It triggered because I've never thought about that before. That question that you asked, you know, what did your father give you for a value? What did your mother give you? And my brain just immediately went, well, my father gave me hard work and my mother gave me service to others, helping people. And
That's great.
I've just never thought of it. So I mean, thank you, because that was an interesting exercise. And if you're listening, I'm sure you probably had a couple of things that triggered in your mind too. And so once you get that, go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry, but
no,
it's just fun because I've had people turn that on me and say, well, what are yours, Todd, right?
Right.
So the value my mother gave me was the power of mental health and the importance of mental health. And the value that my father gave me was everything in moderation. And that was a value that his father gave him. And I've actually had an opportunity. I did this with my wife on Mother's Day. We were having a Zoom with my wife and her mom and her grandmother. And I got to ask each of those ladies the value.
And see the link?
Oh, yeah. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Were they all similar?
They were.
Interesting.
Yep.
Wow, that is a really cool exercise.
It is. And, with family businesses, there's a kind of different gestalt. There's a higher calling, to me anyway. There's a deeper history and heritage. We often say private equity firms and publicly traded companies see things quarter to quarter, and family businesses see things generation to generation.
Well, that's a good differentiator.
And we like that long-term view. So there's more than just what's happening today,
Well, I want to switch gears just a little bit here. There's something that I know is really an issue in today's environment, and it's not just for family businesses, but for all businesses. And that's something that you hear a lot, and I've heard a lot from my friends that are business owners, and just in general, that people can't find people to work. Can you just tell us a little bit your thoughts about why that is and what's going on in today's world as to why people can't hire people?
Yeah, and this is a great question because if you ask 3 different people their opinion on it, you'll get 6 answers.
I was going to say multiple different answers.
It's just fascinating. And I was at an event last night where somebody asked a CPA there that question, and he had a very analytical answer, and all those answers are valid. The challenge that I see is that the population of the United States is not shrinking. It's growing. So that to me is a huge indicator that it really shouldn't be hard to recruit people. Now, I've got a small business. We're 11 people. In the last 2 years, I've lost none. I can't say the same thing for a lot of our clients. They're really struggling. And what I find is the clients that struggle are the ones who are thinking short term, the ones that are not focusing on their values. So what becomes a lodestone to talent is culture and values. Now, those values that we created and the companies that have very strong cultures and very strong guiding principles, it doesn't take a day, a week, or a month. It took us 2 years to solidify our values. It doesn't have to take 2 years. Now I can just imagine everybody stopping this podcast because I don't have 2 years,
I need it now.
Right. And therein is part of the problem. So that's why I like that generation to generation thought process and approach, because it does take some time. But once you have it, it is locked in and it just attracts people. So how do you use the values? It's not just defining them, but it's also living them. So we have a client, SportView Technologies. It's a 3rd generation family business, and we did some work for them. And when we were digging into their values, we found that everybody knew them. Not only did everybody know them and know the behavioral definition as well as the Webster's definition, I asked, how do you use them? And so what I heard was they said, Todd, every Monday we get all the managers on a phone, and we go around and we give a quick check-in of every department, and every department has to tell one person from their department who lived their values in the previous week. So every Monday, every manager is reporting on that, and then whoever they highlight gets a gift card or some sort of attaboy.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's constant reinforcement. So then the employees know they're not just words on our website or words on a wall in a conference room.
They're actually living.
Right. My boss is looking for them all the time. So that's kind of day to day. Now, when you're interviewing, now you really have to use these as a screen, right? So how do you ask questions that are behaviorally oriented to ensure that the candidate lives those values or will fit with yours? And a lot of times when you're recruiting like a VP of sales or a sales leader, that's when you have to be the most careful because salespeople are really good at selling,
Right.
and they're selling themselves. But you got to get into values. So, there's these great questions. Tell me about a time when you chose people over money, or have you ever had an experience where you failed and what did you learn from it? So when you're getting past the how many direct reports do you have, or what time do you show up in the morning, and you get deeper into some of these intrinsic behavioral questions.
Who are you as a person?
Exactly, exactly. And one of the great questions, and I say great in a sarcastic way, is when you sit down and you say, "So tell me about yourself." Well, you're not going to find out anything.
Right.
You really got to dig in and ask those focused behavioral questions to uncover what are their driving values.
I like that. And you mentioned that with salespeople in general, which obviously with what I do, there's quote unquote a lot of selling, but in reality, it's solving for somebody's issue. And you're kind of doing the same thing in reverse, right? And I'm guessing that in the process of trying to hire somebody that's very sales oriented, that you're trying to, kind of get through that screen to really understand what is it that makes them tick and do they fit in. So what would that look like as opposed to somebody that's not in a sales position?
Yeah, let's see if I can answer your question. Bring me back to it if I don't, because
Sure.
I'm gonna give you some examples. So I had one client ran a third generation family business who wanted the candidate, not sales, wanted the candidate to solve the problem. He was desperate. Todd, I'm desperate to find somebody to solve my problem. So guess what he heard? He heard solutions everywhere. He fell in love everywhere. That's a problem, right? So what we do is we help our clients to craft questions in the beginning. So when we help them write that job profile, which usually only takes us a day to write it for them, it takes 3 months to write it for ourselves, but it only takes us a day to write it for them. We pull from that job profile the key questions, 12 questions, right? And so one of the most important things is that you're asking the same questions of every candidate. So there has to be consistency, so you're gathering the same data, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
The second thing is you're not just talking about tell me about the problems you solved and blah, blah, blah. You've got to dig into experiences, right? Have you ever had an employee that you mentored and went on to bigger and better things? Tell me about that person. Right? Have you ever had to fire somebody? Tell me about that situation and how it came about. We're constantly talking to candidates about the STAR method. What is the situation? How did you approach it? And what was the result? Because past behaviors predict future results. And so we want our clients to really get at those behaviors. And a lot of times in an interview, people can be nervous. And as an interviewee, you want to impress the interviewer. So you might get into fluffy speak. You just talk about business from a high level, right? You could do this, you should do this, etc. But no. This is what I did. We had a problem with on-time delivery. And I had no idea what was going on. So I circled my team and we went through a Kaizen analysis of what was going on and figuring out how to solve the problem. And Bob figured out that this one trucking company was always showing up an hour late. And so we had a conversation with our supplier and we fixed the problem. And on-time delivery was fixed in 3 days. So a very specific example, and that a lot of times companies are not getting it. That's the key.
So it's really finding out the behavior and how they do things as a real life person, not the XYZ numbers results, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so if you were going to give advice to a business owner, and we're not even talking about executives here because that's really your specialty, but let's say they're just hiring your normal everyday job. Maybe it's a warehouse job, maybe it's a receptionist at a desk, but if you could give them, hey, this will really help you to get somebody in through like interview questions or whatever it may be to align with your values, what would you tell someone?
Use your values in the interview. So I'll just use one of ours, helping. So Sean, let's say I'm interviewing you for a job like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Sean, helping is really important here at Harvey Hohauser and Associates. We define that as your ability to drop whatever you're doing to help a coworker or a client. Could you please give me an example of a time that you dropped everything to help a coworker or a client?
Well, that's a really good question. I like that. And one thing that I was trying to get at here is how important is it for somebody to really use those values and make it as part of their interview process for the everyday people, not just the executives, but like I mentioned, the receptionist or the warehouse worker or a construction worker, because it's really easy to, I think, in a lot of people's minds, at least in my mind, to go, oh yeah, well that's great. We're going to do that for the executives, for the important positions, but we're not going to go through all that trouble, for this position or that position because, they're just going to drive a truck or whatever it might be.
And that is why they have problem finding people, because they're not focusing on the values. So I don't care if you make $10 an hour or $10,000 an hour. There's values in there, just like there's blood in all of us. So it's imperative as an owner or leader of a company or a division or a department to find those. Everybody has values, and you have to know who you are first. So they have to be defined, and they have to be reinforced, and they have to be lived at your company, and then you have to use them in the interview process no matter what level. And it's there. They're not complicated. The values that I've seen out there in the world, not just our clients, but anywhere, they're simple. They're not complicated. So people understand what empowerment, learning, family, helping, adaptation, independence, respect. Those are pretty cut and dried. And in the interview, you can define it. Hey, respect here means this. Give me an example of when you lived respect like that. It's pretty straightforward.
So the other argument you could make is that for generations, right, there's been this whole process of interviewing people, and it doesn't include this conversation of values. And it's worked forever. And why is it that today things have shifted to where this is now important versus we're just going to ask our standard questions that we've done for 50 to 100 years?
Well, you might want to bring my father into the podcast for that, because now you're talking about sociology and anthropology. And, I have a degree in psychology and theater and this family business degree. I have a master's degree as well in business, but you're really talking about sociological changes in our culture. So I'll present one that I think is
I just want your thoughts. I'm not asking for the PhD thesis on why. I just want what do you think, and what can we do moving forward to try and align with that versus continuing to do what a company may have always done.
Yeah, I don't know if I can solve it for the world. I can solve it for our clients, and I can give you an idea.
Experience, so, right? We always talk about our experiences.
Yeah.
So what would your experience be?
My experience tells me, after my long 51 years of walking this planet, that we're distracted. We're constantly distracted and want to be entertained. Whether it's TikTok, Hulu, Disney Plus, whatever, and I'm a victim of those things too. I love those things. You know what the number one growing title in the United States is? The number one title which has grown the most over the last 365 days?
I don't.
Content creator.
Interesting.
The number one growing is now, I got that data from LinkedIn, so someone's going to have to fact check it, but I think LinkedIn is pretty good when they put
That's
stuff
probably
up.
A pretty good stat.
So people are constantly putting things out there to distract us and to just have us not pay attention, to have that rush of, is it endorphins? What is everybody's talking?
Dopamine.
Yeah, the dopamine
Or
rush.
serotonin.
Yeah, right. And so to actually take some time to sit there for a minute and to think about your values. When I ask candidates that question, not everybody is an answer just like that. Wow, Todd, that's a good question. They stall a little bit. I got to think about that a little bit. That could be kind of sad because you don't know what your core values is, what's driving you. So I think part of today, we're distracted from really who we are. And it's really tough when you have a company and you have customers and you got to deliver because, well, these values are great, but I got to get stuff out the door. You know, if I make my customer angry, we're going to lose that multi-million-dollar contract and my boss is not going to be happy. And that's why it's hard to take a minute and to reflect on that and to craft those values because they'll just magnetize everything, but it takes time. So my thought is that we're just so distracted that we're not paying attention to stuff like that.
It's interesting, and I want to just keep on the same topic, but switch the point of view a little bit because a lot of the listeners are not business owners. They may be retired, they may still be working, they're an employee, or they work on their own thing, whatever it might be. So for those people, why in your experience are values important to your personal life, and what impact have your values had on yours?
Oh boy. Well, I can't answer that in a minute, but
that's a loaded question.
Right. So you're talking about retirees. I mean, probably a lot of them have grandchildren. Don't you want better things for your grandchildren? Could you maybe talk to your grandchild about a slower time, a time when you took the time to marinate about things? And so I'm going to be a grandfather in October. I'm very
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited about it because I know all the mistakes that I made when I was younger. And I feel like it's my mandate to ensure that my grandchild can avoid some of those bigger mistakes. You know, I'm constantly talking to my son, who's 29, about parenthood. And he really, I might get a little verklempt right now and get a little start teary-eyed because he often says to me, "You were a really great dad." And that's just so wonderful to hear.
That's really cool.
And I said, well, I felt like my job was to make my dad's job, was to improve my dad's job. So now, son, you really got it tough because you got to do me better.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answered all of your question, but when you started talking about your listeners and who they may be, you know, folks who are retired are the mentors of our world. And there's so much information there. I remember sitting down with my grandfather, who was born in, oh boy, I hope I can remember, 1914, passed away in the 90s. You know, all the things he saw. And I would ask him, you know, you saw mass transportation. You saw television go from black and white to color. You saw the man on the moon. You know, you saw all this stuff. What was it like? And so maybe I was just weird to have that approach, but there's a lot of power from people that have walked the earth from a long time that they can teach younger people, and values have a lot to do with it.
Well, I like that, but what I was trying to get at is you, in the process of building your business, you defined your core values. So do you think it's worth it for somebody who is not a business owner, whether they're retired, an employee, or whoever, to sit down and define their own values? And what impact did that have when you defined yours on your personal life?
Well, that is a great question. I don't know if I can answer it because I only know that I'm a business owner.
Right.
So, I mean, I knew I had values before.
Let's make a division. So here's your division. The division is you as a business owner created this values that you wrote down and you now have it set out in stone. So if we can separate the business part and go to your personal life, how did defining those values impact your personal life?
Yeah, well, it really helped. when I sat down with my now wife, but who was someone I was dating at the time, and she said to me on our second date, "What are your non-negotiables?" I was like, wow.
On the second date.
Yeah, this was good. I like a nice, hearty kind of debate and conversation. So I was a little taken aback, and I had to ask, what do you mean? And we really got into a values conversation. So if I hadn't explored that, and if I hadn't known that within myself, I could have had a bad match. And because I knew those things, I got a good match. And I'm very happy.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that experience.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of power to defining your values, because then you have a starting point, right? A foundation to say, okay, this is really what I 100% believe. This is what I want to live. And if you ever divert from your core values, you'll be able to see that in your life, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. If I've looked at my past mistakes and thought about them in relation to my value, oh, I got away from my value there. I should have seen that, and I broke away, because the value, it's your blood.
Right.
It's there. You have to have something significantly traumatic or significantly happen to you in your life to shift your value.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it from not only a regular everyday person or a retiree, if you have those values where you know them, like yours is elf hair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't have to be as well defined as that, but if you just have the idea of, hey, these are my values, you wrote them down one day, I think it'd be easier to share the experiences, right, that you're talking about. If you're going to try and tell a story of hey, here's how I grew up, and you're going to teach your grandchild, you already have it from the fact that you've written down, okay, these are my values, and you can kind of filter what you're going to teach through those. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. But, I don't know somebody over 60 I haven't talked to who didn't know their values.
Right.
And didn't know what their guideposts were and what they liked and what they didn't like. Taking that time to be self-reflective, that might be an exercise for a grandparent to do with a grandchild.
Oh, that's a good idea. I like that.
Yeah. Hey, Sean, have you ever thought about why you make these decisions, or what motivates you, or what is a go, no-go? What are your non-negotiables? That would be an interesting conversation for a grandparent to have with a grandchild.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So, Todd, as we start to wrap things up here, before we do, I have a question I ask every single guest. If there was any questions that I should have asked you that I just didn't or didn't think of?
I guess you could ask me if I ever worked with a client that didn't match my values.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Well, that ended quickly. No, and I look back, and that's one of those times where I said, I probably could have been paying better attention to my value, because I let that one slip by. Maybe it was like 08, 09 when things were really slow, and it was like, I'm going to have to sacrifice a value here for some business. And that hurt. It hurt because it was not an easy relationship.
How did that end up turning out?
Poorly. Yeah, it didn't. It didn't work at all. It had to end. So we went our separate ways, and that's just the way it happens sometimes.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Todd, It's been a great conversation. I learned a ton, which I absolutely love learning. So Thank you for sharing today.
I had fun. It was great. You're a great interviewer.
Oh, thank you.
You got some good stuff out of it. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Before we part, are there any final words that you have for the audience?
Good luck defining your values, and I hope you sit down with your grandchildren and have a fun time with them.
Awesome. And in the show notes, we'll have the ability for you guys to go click right on Todd's website if you're a business owner. Obviously, this is what he does every single day. So if you need anything, feel free to give Harvey Hohauser and Associates a call.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you for listening.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for listening to Safe and Sound Radio with Sean Sparkman. Sean Sparkman. If you have questions or would like to suggest a topic for future shows, contact Sean at 313-246-9278 or visit the website at www.safeandsoundretirement.net. That's www.safeandsoundretirement.net.
I must leave.